Talk of last few years worth of work. Maybe a lot of things will be covered. If you if you think we can continue this session outside of the talk, if there is any specific point, whether it's the technology or the process, we can discuss this outside. So I tried to make a story out of it. So the talk is how we use the powers of PowerShell to control chaos at our workspace or in our department. This wouldn't have been possible without the two members listed there, Will White and Monica. So I've especially listed the name because they were very key to this whole journey. So before I start the story, I'll just give you some context. So I joined the domain 16 years ago as a QA. I progressed through as a developer, lead developer, assistant project manager. I don't know how I ended up there, but again, came down the route from manager to consultant to an implementer to an engineer. Right now, I'm working in the release management, change management, DevOps, whatever you name it, tech ops space. We are working in, or I'm working in Gain Capital. We are in the space of DevOps or automation. It's mostly Windows House. It's in spread betting industry, trading, financial firm for retail and institutional providers. So most of our systems are on Windows. There are few systems on Linux. So we're going to talk about the story how did we reach from chaos to Zen in our space. We'll talk about a few common problems that we all see or would have seen, especially if you're in tech ops space or in the front line, second line space. I'm not sure. Are any one of you in the front line, second line, or application side of it, or all of you are in? Cool. Okay. So this may not be 100% relevant, but at least the story or the theme will resonate with you. So the approach we took, the journey, the modules that we built, challenges faced, and such. So we'll go through this story. I was purely a Linux guy. I don't know how I moved to Windows, but that was a change. I was happily working on Windows till this happened. So that's pretty much happening everywhere, universally, I guess. There are systems built in Linux, native to Linux, and Linux is omnipotent. Having said that, the Windows world has improved significantly, and I'm going to show how we solved these problems. These are problems that I faced when I joined the team as a release engineer. My job was to automate a lot of deployments, releases, changes, and anything I could find. For the first 6 months, I couldn't do anything. I don't know how I passed my probation, but so there was a challenge. The challenge was the company had identified a potential issue. The issue was that the scale and the speed wasn't good enough. They identified the solution that we need automation, we need streamlining. So I was hired as a result of that understanding, but the challenge was, how do I solve that problem? Because when you are trying to do the same thing and expect a different result, it's not going to happen. And I got into the mix and I was doing the same thing because there was no time to fix. So I tried to put down the problems on paper. This is what I came up with. These are not directly related to the space that I was working in. Change, release does not really resonate with any one of them in particular. But there was a common theme. We can't do a data center failover if we can't do an application failover. We can't do an application failover if we can't start and stop it cleanly. We can't do a start-stop if we don't know what the pre and post conditions are there. So we won't even touch it if we don't know whether the system is healthy or not. So it's a common theme, and it's true for on-prem, virtual, cloud, container. It's true for everything, anything that is out there. So anything that we do had, in this case, had a common theme. Test environment refresh. I'm sure now in containers it's easy to just bin the container and come up with a new one, but in the old way, and glad to say we are still there, in test environments, refresh is a big deal. A lot of database refresh needs to be done, application code needs to be rebaselined. The sequence in which we do stuff is very important. Drift reporting comes as part of environment management, environment support at scale. So the issues which are faced by operations team for life are very well known, but there are processes to support that. There are teams, 5-member team, 6-member team, or even larger teams to support that. But for a test environment, there are no such teams, or usually there are no such teams, or usually relied on the same set of people who support production. For them, test environments are second-class citizens. So we are a team who were kind of responsible for managing this for test environments. And by virtue of doing so, by virtue of understanding the system, we saw the whole. We saw how the live was different or similar to test. We saw the issues in each applications because we would deploy each applications ourselves. We saw the issues in each services. We saw issues with people. There were people who would love to solve problems but create 4 more. There were people who would work with us. There were people who would not even come and talk to us. There are all sorts of problems that you can imagine exist in any organization. It was not new. What was great was there were fundamentals in place. There are still the fundamentals like naming conventions, fundamentals like routine exercises of refresh, fundamentals like processes which were non-existent at the time in any other organization I've worked in. So any release had a rollback, and every release had a rollback, and rollback was tested, which was, in my 10 years of experience till that time, was unheard of. So there were fundamentals in place. I said, with those fundamentals, which can take ages or never happen, let's move ahead because the building blocks or foundations are there. So we approached it with a very simple philosophy. We picked one problem. We said we'll solve that one problem and build on top of it. And we will find a balance in what we are doing where we want to go. Because there's no one who will get a full-time job to fix the problem that they are working on. So we said, let's find out one problem which will save our time and use that time to fix the next problem. So we will build interest and save ourselves from the pain that we go through because of the ad hoc request that comes in. So this is the short representation of journey so far. It's not that we were not happy. We were good because we were ahead in the league. We had scripts back then. It was 7-8 years ago. We had scripts. This issue or this story I'm talking about is for the environment refresh, or is also for patching, is also true for failovers. So that was a massive exercise. The team would get together, the whole of application development and us, so-called ops for dev environment, would get together. We will plan this out. This will be monthly or bi-monthly exercise. Big deal. We would allocate time in a sprint to do that. It was not a trivial job. There were scripts which will run through all the state, find out the actual state of the environment, transform it into an XML, because the XML would not be usable by the start and stop script. We would transform that XML into an input for the start and stop script. This exercise will have to happen at a time, let's say T-1 or T-2, because the event would be, let's say, on Thursday. We have to start preparing on Monday, but by the time we reach on Wednesday, the environment would have changed. So we will be continuously running around ourselves, running on a chase, trying to get to the point wherein we know exactly what the state of environment is before we go into the refresh mode. And it would be therefore become a specialist job, because the person who is doing it would know exactly what has happened, or would have to keep tab on so many things which could have gone wrong or changed in the duration. From there to CMDB based. It was automated, so it was possible, and it was definitely doable in working hours, but it was still very painful, very difficult, very specialist oriented. We wanted to get to a state wherein it would be a non-event for us. It could be done by anyone in the team. In this case, it was Monica. Monica was our Google, our Alexa, our Siri, our KMDB, our expert. She did this job in 5 days. We could have taken 10 days to do it. So we wanted to get to a point where all the team members could do it in X amount of hours. So we created CMDB. This was a separate project. We used that CMDB to give us a static information. The processes that we put in place ensured that the CMDB was up to date with the service names, the version numbers, the states. So the 5-day process to prepare became a 2.5 day because most of the data was already there. What would take 2 hours to scan the environment would now be already there. You would need 5 minutes for that. So the chase time reduced, preparation time improved, and there were 2-page documents, but we could follow it and we could do it in 2.5 days. Next stage was that we said, instead of reconciling it on the fly or on the request, let's build this process and data in the whole CMDB that we don't have to reconcile on an ad hoc basis. So if there was any change in state on the service on the server, we will alert ourselves and we would track that as an exception. So at any point in time, over 3 days, we could generate an exception report and know what was the delta. So we could create a diff report, we could act on those systems. Also, as part of refresh, it was a very simple exercise. We will stop the environment, get the version of code from live, and deploy. We'll stop the environment, get the version of code from live, get the packages for that, and deploy it in test environment. While the DB team will restore the database, we'll restore the code, and we'll start the environment. This had to be done in a sequence and in coordination with the DB team, because we could not leave a service running which had DB connections. We could not proceed to start them until they're done. We could not confirm to them to proceed. Sorry. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. What level of detail did you need to capture in your CMDB to understand the...
I'll show you an example. So, for example, we needed 3 things. Where a service is running, what is the name of the service? When I say where means what server, what's the name of service, and how many instances of that service is there. Additionally, what is the state of the service. So those are bare minimum details. We added on to the actual state of service an entity called desired state, because a service could be running but it should be stopped. So we added those 4 fields. So those are bare minimum. Service name, we needed service names because service name was like an alias. So I could call a service called IP gateway, another person will call it instruction processor gateway, third person would call it something. So until then, there was a PDF document as opposed to a CMDB or a database or a text file so we created we scanned the environment using PowerShell, got all the service names. The convention is...
So you knew what the server estate was?
Yes. Okay. So we went to AD, got all the servers, scanned all the servers for applications installed by us. Because we followed standards, we could find that out. Standards were simple. If an application is running with a service account and is in a certain directory, we could look them up. There were more details that we have populated in CMDB. There are so many more, but for the refresh scope, those were the 4 details that we needed. We additionally added few details like the sequence in which the services needs to start and stop, the wait or the delays between the 2 servers. For example, if an authentication gateway needs to start first and the other gateways needs to start second, we added the sequencing. If all the services in a category hit the database at the same time, we need to span it out over a period of time because the database could be loaded and it would not respond and services would time out. So we had false positives initially when we did not consider these scenarios. So we had to build the system in such a way that these small things for a smaller application may not make sense, but when you have 500 services and 200 web services and all of them start at once and hit the database, it doesn't happen in live, or it may not happen in live. So you may do a parallel start, but your underlying infrastructure and test environment may not cope up. Maybe in live it can. So there was those scenarios that we discovered in doing, iterating through the process, and we built over the months those capabilities that we found would help us to get to a point where we don't need to do anything and it's already there. So desired state was a classic example from that.
Thank you.
Okay, so we integrated the CMDB and the refresh process. So we looked at the CMDB as the input and the refresh process as the tool. We just curated the input, on a continuous basis so that we don't have to do anything on the day of the exam. Anyone with basic instructions could run the show because the instructions became smaller, the tasks became smaller. It was 2.5 hours as opposed to 5 days. Now, anytime anyone could come to us, say, can we have a refresh tomorrow? And it won't be us that would be the blockers, it would be the DBA team because they would need to find the storage and restore and 15 other things. So that way, you can see the smile on our faces. We were happy, but that's not where we want to be. So we can do refreshes on the fly, doesn't mean it's painless. We don't even want to worry about doing refreshes. We want to get to a state where anyone can go and request for a refresh and it just happens. I'll show you a process. It's a 20-step process. We have still got a 5-page documentation. It's simple, but it's repeatable. It's repeatable. And because it's repeatable, we can put a workflow around it. Now, the question was, we never had time to do so, or there was never an incentive to do so. But what has happened in recent times is, as opposed to where a refresh was a bi-monthly or every 2-month job, had become monthly, has now become twice or 3 times a month. So we are doing more of it. From our perspective, the tasks involved in preparing and starting and finishing a refresh has remained the same. The number of servers, number of services has increased, doesn't change anything. It's one more data entry point in the CMDB. So we want to get to a point that we know exactly who triggered it, who vetoed it, what was the starting point, what was the duration, and then we can come back to these teams and systems to say, guys, this system was slow, because right now we are not capturing metrics. We are just doing automation, we are not improving on it. We are not reporting it back. We're just saying, okay, we are saving ourselves, but we are not giving something back. We have saved ourselves, so now we need to give back to the organization. So that's where we want to go to. How did we go there? This was one big piece, and this helped us build a lot of things. We had to integrate with a monitoring system because we will have to stop the alerts before we shut down the services, otherwise we'll be spammed. We had to integrate with our CMDB, which was over OData or SQL DB or REST APIs. We had to integrate with load balancers and DNS interfaces, which obviously is depending on where you're coming from, is not easy. If you understand the concepts, that's one thing. If you have to understand the product and the tooling. Again, we had to understand how do we assert artifacts. So in test environments, it was easy for us to understand what is where, because we would be the ones who would be deploying it. But let's say in live, there are many teams deploying many applications over, and we do daily deployments, or still do daily deployments. So there are releases happening every day in production. So the environment is changing regularly. So to assert that the environment is what it should be was a big job. And I don't know how other companies solve it. We solved it via PowerShell. We then put it all together to come up with a DC failover project. I'll tell you the story for the failover, but it all helped us to build a failover module, which we could then give a command to say, failover the entire data center from one to the other. This meant it is no different than environment refresh, because that's exactly what we are doing, shutting down one side and bringing up the other. In this case, it was there are a few unique cases that we had to deal with. Challenges faced, and we overcame most of them. Otherwise, this project wouldn't have been successful. These are no different challenges that anyone faces in their day-to-day job. The thing with our project was we couldn't have done it in isolation. So here, the example of failover module. All these items, all these blocks are PowerShell modules. Some of them are 3,000, 4,000 lines of code, 30, 40 functions, probably more. All of them were written in personal time. And the reason they could be written in personal time was that we had some personal time, because we had invested personal time in the front. So when we saved our time from the refresh, we applied those savings to building these modules. So for the service quality from the team remained the same, but we were improving the fundamentals. We were putting the foundations in place. So the team size remains the same, but the throughput increased massively. All this was not an explicit ask from anyone. That was another key. So we were 3-member team, as I said in the beginning. We decided to make a change. We were proceeding with building these capabilities. But as soon as you go outside the core, then you face these challenges. It's easier to talk in 2-member, 3-member small groups. It's very difficult to institutionalize something. So, and you meet all kinds of people. You meet people who are, resistant to change, or you meet people who want to do the same thing in 5 other different ways, using 5 different technologies. You want a person who would see 10,000 feet view, but would forget the reality. And at the same time, someone who would build something and just go away because he doesn't care. He built something and that was it. Comfort levels, skills. So we built a failover module which can fail over the entire DC, but the people who would ideally use it were not comfortable with the technology. In this case, PowerShell, but if you look at from their concept or their point of view, it was very difficult for them to import a module, put it in a certain directory, do version control, and then do 5 other things. So we had to make it easier for them to familiarize them with the tool before they could adopt it. All of this problem was solved. I'm sure if you want to talk about any of the challenges that you face, we can discuss in detail. Without this, we wouldn't have moved ahead. What were the principles and guidelines we used? We had to simplify our modules to the point that the user doesn't have to think. Because when we were building modules for ourselves, there were only 3-member team who were focusing on it, but there were 3 more in US and 2 more in Poland who would use it. So when the handover becomes difficult, the adoption rate reduces. So we had to make things very simple. We focused on modules over scripts for simple reason, because scripts, we believed in modules as dependencies tracking and ownership and the capabilities that it brings over the scripts. Scripts are fine. We do day-to-day tasks with scripts. We checked in source control. That's an obvious thing. It's not an obvious. It's obvious to many of you, but it wasn't obvious to us initially because we used to write script and leave it in the folder on a share. We packaged it. We versioned it. We used Chocolatey to package the modules and version control using NuGet package. Sorry, we checked in, we created the modules. We created NuGet packages out of it. We stored it on a repository and then gave a Chocolatey command to install and uninstall the modules. The reason we used Chocolatey was because once we had Chocolatey command given to the operator, it would be just a Choco install module name. And we could install any module as a dependency, and the management aspect of it was a lot easier. The reason we packaged it as NuGet was because we were Windows shop. That was what we were doing at the time for business applications. We said, why not? And Chocolatey and NuGet are compatible, so there was no duplication of effort. We used TeamCity because, again, that was there. Build and store, as I said, everything was in-house. Everything was on-prem. We had built commenting and logging as a default, which is not a given when you start a project like this. But the guys who were building it, especially Will, he's good in the fundamentals. So even the first script that we built for the failover module, we had all these in place. We were building a module, we had checked in, we had package control, we had built pipeline. I'll show you how it looks. We proceeded, the principles that we followed is we build it and people will use it. If you don't build it, if you don't have anything to show, then it's all talk in the air. And by the time we convince someone, we can show them instead of talking about it to 5 people, because 5 ideas will come and it will never materialize. So if we build a minimum viable product, then we can enhance it or change it. So we kept it simple. We lowered the barrier to entry. That means if there was any feedback, any objection that I wouldn't want to use this because, we took this as a requirement, worked on it, be it, say, management sign-off. So I want my boss to tell me to use it. Sure. I want it as a batch file. Sure. I don't like PowerShell. I'll give you an icon. You won't know it's a PowerShell. You will just get a console. Um, oh, I want it to be access controlled. Sure, why not? Means even PowerShell scripts could be access controlled. I want logging. Logging was there, but I want the logging in the application dashboard. Why do we have to, log? So we started shipping PowerShell output logs. So we had the foundation. It was a matter of changing the mindset, and it wasn't an easy job. But every bump that we faced, we took that as a requirement and worked on it. We never cut corners. This is how our pipeline looks like. Will White, in this case, the developer, operator, tester. Monica is the QA. I'm the sysadmin until the actual sysadmin, not sysadmin, operators took over. So you would check in, Git. We use GitHub or internal Git. It was a NuGet package. TeamCity would. Right now we use Jenkins for some of the jobs. With TeamCity was the primary build tool or packaging tool. We would test it in test environment. We would follow the same protocols that a development organization followed. We would have applied the test in test environment and only then promote it to live. Again, Chocolatey would be the package manager and installation tool. There were few things which we focused on. Command names. We intentionally worked on command names to be simple, especially the ones which were going to be used by operators. And we didn't want to, so there was a meetup, a catch-up. I'll give you an example, wherein the instruction was failover a system to a DC. Failover system DC. That's exactly what is needed, and that is exactly what the commando was. Failover, system name, and data center name. Now, that is how we built our command. The command, we created alias if there was a different team who would use a different command. We created switches for catering to different strategies. For example, the failover command can give failover stop a data center, failover start a data center. Stop start is fine, but if you are doing patching, we would want the services to be disabled. So failover stop a data center strategy patching. So those are simple things, but when you're doing an enterprise-wide task, it's not very intuitive at the beginning, and you discover more things. And if you have switches, if you have flags, if you have toggles, if you have logging, those things are very fundamental to building a sustainable, reusable module. So we use switches to support scenarios. As I said, there were scenarios where we would issue the failover command, and we would only expect things to be taken out of load balancer. So that would be our default. But then there would be a failover scenario wherein we want to prevent any issues because of network internally, and we would want the applications to stop as opposed to running in the background. So we would say all, or so we would come up with scenarios, we would build them in, and it would be an extension to an existing feature. Segregation of environment. We wanted the same module to be used for different environment, but we didn't want even by mistake that we run the same module against two different environments. So initially we made it very difficult for us to change it to live, but later on we just made it an icon based thing wherein the user credential for your privileged account would need to be entered. Authorization, again, an access control. So there were two controls that we put in. You had to run the script with admin account or privileged account, and any access control that you require for the subsystems would have to be keyed in at the time that you run the system. It wouldn't be static, it wouldn't be in the system. That enabled us to do a few things, that we could put this on any server as long as it had access. We knew that nothing is in there in the package that would expose us except for the endpoints. Because it was a runtime attribute, the person who is doing it would have to know about it and type about it. You cannot just double click and run a batch file which could bring down the environment. We also put in a AD group check, because let's say there are 5 operators, not all of them were same level of skills. We wanted only certain operators to use it. So we also created a group, specialist group. Within the operator group, if the person is present in a certain AD group, he could run it. And once they are all trained, they would all have the same access control. So logging was not so important initially. We used to log, but we never used to go back to look at it because everything we would be seeing in the console. Logging was tremendously important when we started giving it to people to operate. Like, what did the guy do? What did the guy actually do? Or why did this issue happen? And logs would come in so handy at those times. So any tool that doesn't have logging and is enterprise class is a pain in the backside. So I would suggest if you're not doing logging, start doing logging, because you never know when you will be asked to troubleshoot an issue, especially if it's in your module. You would want that trace to be there. Speed bumps. It was so easy for us to shut down whole pre-prod and without speed bumps, because it's pre-prod, we don't care, and it's a shutdown. But in live, you don't want to shut down live in the middle of a night or a weekend without knowing what you're doing. So in pre-prod, we never had controls in place to, when we issue a shutdown environment, we won't care because it will only be one environment. In live, when we shut down DC, we need to be careful. So we had speed bumps after each application group within the DC. Now that could be a pain if we are using that as a static feature in test environments. So we said, okay, let's wrap this up into something different. We only want that as a Easter egg. So if someone knows exactly what to do, which we set up a global variable to say, okay, if you set the global variable to true or false, then your speed bump goes away, which if people know PowerShell or if operators learn PowerShell, they can do that live, but it's a hidden toggle. So we could have used a switch, but switch is visible to everyone. We decided not to use that. So we used global variables to put speed bumps and such Easter eggs. We parallelized to the max. So the pre-prod environment shutdown used to take 1.5 hours if everything was sequenced. And for refresh every 2 weeks, 1.5 hours was not a bad, in terms of if we were not looking at it, it wasn't bad. But we don't even want to spend 1.5 hours now. Why? Like, the database is going to get wiped off. It is going to get restored. We are not affecting or going to corrupt the database. So why should we do a clean stop, so to say, or sequential stop? The system should stop anyways. So we said, okay, let's introduce parallelism. So we introduce POSH RSJOB, if I'm correct, or the two modules which allows parallelism. And now we can give any number of count. The system can stop now in 15 minutes, depending upon the number of threads we start. Global parameters we use to toggle values like speed bumps. So this pretty much sums up the picture. Like, we were doing our job, we were having fun. It was awful at times, and people were doing shit, but things got better. Now we are preparing for events, we are preparing for disasters, we are preparing for unplanned tasks, or we are prepared for unplanned tasks. We are just in the mode of continuous improvement, saying, okay, it used to take 2 hours, now let's say, how short can it take? Instead of we reacting, we are now preparing for the future. So right now there is a major infrastructure upgrade project going on. I know all these fundamentals that are built will be reused, because the fundamental of dependency, the fundamentals of logging, the archival, the management doesn't go away if the underlying systems change. So that's a state where everyone should try to reach, and it's not easy, but I guess with this story that I shared, I hope if any one of you is working towards that Zen-like state or has a vision of that Zen-like state, this will give some inspiration or idea as to how to go there. That's it. Any questions?
Hi, well done on the presentation. Quick question though, with the Chocolatey install,
Yep.
how come you chose Chocolatey over PowerShell Guess?
So at the time,
PowerShell.
so we had to think about it. PowerShell Get would still be PowerShell, first of all. So we would have to teach the guy to launch PowerShell console, do a few things in PowerShell. When I said chocolatey, we showed the operators a few individuals, like you do chocolatey install Notepad++, you want Notepad. You do chocolatey install 4 other things. It's not just PowerShell. So we were trying to showcase that PowerShell is nothing to be feared of, but at the same time, this tool can do 5 other things which your friends may need. So we were trying to solve the problem that the fear of PowerShell goes away, but at the same time, they use that technology for other things that they might be doing. So yes, we could have used PowerShell Get, but PowerShell Get doesn't fly with Notepad++. So that's why.
Cool, thank you.
That's it from me. There were a few, like this is, I can show you a demo later, but this is basically how we do choc install failover module. It does the usual stuff. We install it. If it's already installed, we at the runtime, we given all the parameters to the script, whether we need parallel time, what's the timeout for each services, what's the number of parallel attempts, no prompt is the toggle that I was talking about. We even the run checks, so every time the system would come up or go down, whether do we need to do checks or not. All these are parameters that we would enter at the execution time. Everything would get logged. So whatever was done would be available for audit. So this is a sample of the CMDB that we built. It's a simple application developed over a week. At the time, there was a Microsoft product called Lightswitch. We just used it. It was a drag drop UI based thing. We populated the data using the output from PowerShell. It's a SQL database at the backend. So if you look, I'm not sure if it's visible, but if these are groups that we name them, so application group 1, 2, 3, active, passive, DC, and these are the collection of services that consist of this group. So any command that we give will be on this group, and it could be 1 or 500 services. Each service will have a wait, startup wait and shutdown wait, because the weights may differ. Whether it's running or not, so we will capture the state, and every command would update the state as it goes along. Then we would have a singleton or not. So we found some services were singletons, i.e. only one instance of the service could run or should run, even though they are installed in 4 boxes of 15. And we had to differentiate those services as opposed to the services which could run on multiple boxes. So these are attributes that we had. Each of this group itself has startup and shutdown wait. Each of these services or clusters have their own weights. We can issue the same command to application groups. We can issue the same command to clusters. Clusters is nothing but a composite of Windows services. So in this case, version information gateway is a collection of version information gateways in test environments. On these servers, they are running or stopped. They are meant to be running or stopped. What's the version and other details. Few other metadata, what's the log file, executable path and such. So these are simple information that we store for the application. This is the future or present, depending on how you look at it. It will be a Jenkins pipeline. We could use Ansible. We have Ansible. We are exploring which one to go. Idea is we will know exactly what duration each step took and where we are in the overall journey. And we could give this to expose this to users or teams, and they can start the process, initiate it, and if we are required, we'll come and troubleshoot the issues. Again, at the end, it's all PowerShell in the background with Jenkins on top. That's it. Thank you.
Sorry, one last question.
Sure.
With going back to the module slide, you don't have to do it.
This one?
I saw Netscaler and
Yep.
SolarWinds modules there.
Yep.
Any plans to publish them anyway?
Uh, sure, I can check that out. It shouldn't be that difficult. So both of them have SDKs. Netscaler has this PowerShell module as well, but it wasn't useful for us in terms of the task that we plan to do. So yeah, I could check that and look to publish that. It's all written by Will White, so I'm sure he's no longer with us in the company, but I'm sure we can look to do that. Thank you.